All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Finance and Corporate Services Committee. We don't have too long of an agenda today. I'm going to start off by asking if there's a mover for the consent item. Moved by Councillor Singh. Any concerns, questions? Not seeing any. Those in favor? And that's everyone. Very good. Okay, up next we have the item 5.1, the method to fill a vacancy of office or councillor for our now vacant Ward 10 seat. And I understand there is a 5-minute presentation from Ms. Fusco. When you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of council, staff, and the public. I'm here to provide an overview of Corporate Services Report 2024-007, Methods to Fill a Vacancy for the Ward 10 office. The report before you provides council with various methods and considerations on how best to fill the vacancy. Following the resignation of the Ward 10 member, Council declared the Ward 10 seat vacant on December 14, 2023, and now Council is required within 60 days to determine the method they want to fill the vacancy. There are two options set out in legislation, either by appointment or by election, and those methods are further defined in the following slides. It is important to note that the Act does not specify requirements relating to the appointment of an individual to fill a council vacancy, other than requiring the appointed member to be eligible. The options presented are based on best practice. There are three different appointment processes possible. 1A is to appoint a candidate from the 2022 municipal election candidates for Ward 10, and typically this is done to the next person in line in terms of the highest number of votes received in 2022. 1B is the appointment of an eligible elector through an established formal selection process, and that process is further outlined in the appendices to your report, being the council appointment procedure. 1C would be the appointment of an eligible elector without a formal selection process at council's choice. Each option is further defined. Option 1A, the appointment of a candidate from the 2022 municipal election, would require the clerk to confirm that the candidate is qualified and consents to the office. If both conditions are met, an appointment bylaw would be brought forward for consideration at a subsequent council meeting. This option results in the fastest filling of the vacancy by the end of January with no costs. Option 1B, an open call for applications, would require council approval of the procedures, including the application form included in the appendices. This would initiate a public process where notice is circulated for a minimum of 2 weeks. Members of the public could apply to fill the vacancy using the required forms. Once the clerk confirms the candidates are qualified, the applications would be placed on an agenda, applicants permitted to address council regarding their application, and the community to be involved. Members of council could ask the candidates questions, and the successful candidate would be determined by the approved balloting process. This option results in council considering the applicants by the end of January, with the members selected and sworn in to office by the end of February. There are nominal costs with this option to post notices in the newspaper and on social media. Option 1C, the direct appointment of a candidate without a formal process, would require the clerk to confirm that the candidate is qualified and consents to the office. If both conditions are met, like in option 1A, an appointment bylaw would be brought forward to consideration at a subsequent council meeting. This option, like 1A, results in the fastest filling of the vacancy by the end of January with no costs. The second option is to direct the city clerk to initiate a by-election to fill the vacancy. To do this, council is required to pass a by-election bylaw within 60 days of the vacancy. The proposed by-election bylaw is attached to the report. By-elections are administered under Section 65 of the Municipal Elections Act, and the timing of nomination day and voting day are prescribed in the legislation. The Act states that by-elections are held in the same manner as the original general election. In 2022, paper ballots were used with a vote count tabulator. The timeline that staff have proposed is an aggressive one to ensure that Ward 10 residents have representation on council within approximately 4 months from the vacancy being declared, while providing an adequate campaign period and time for voters to vote. Staff have proposed that nomination processes would commence this week and close on February 23rd at 2 p.m., allowing 45 days for nomination filing. Voting day would then occur 45 days later on Monday, April the 8th, with 3 advance voting days held the week prior on April 4th, 5th, and 6th. Election results would be confirmed shortly thereafter, and the candidate could be sworn into office at the end of April. Staff have obtained quotations for the most financially significant components of a by-election, including the voting equipment, voter notification cards, and Canada Post mailing costs. These costs are based on running a ward by-election on the same parameters as the 2022 general election, and total between $77,000 and approximately $100,000. It is important to note that these costs do not include the salaries and wages for an election project manager, which is typically hired to assist with project planning, any costs related to hiring members of the public to work the municipal election, or required advertisements and notices that the Act states must be placed in a newspaper. If a by-election is selected, staff have recommended that due to resources and election activities, the approved 2024 council meeting schedule be amended for March and April. So in summary, the next steps would be for council to determine which option they would like to proceed with to fill the vacancy for the Ward 10 councillor. The recommendation in the report requires an option to be inserted. If option 1A or 1C is selected, an additional paragraph is recommended to direct the clerk to confirm the qualifications and consent of the candidate and bring forward the appointment bylaw for adoption at the next council meeting. If option 1B is selected, an additional paragraph is recommended to approve the application procedures for implementation. And lastly, if option 2 is selected, 2 additional paragraphs are recommended to bring forward the required by-election bylaw and to amend the 2024 council and committee meeting calendar. Staff will proceed with planning for whatever option is selected this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is Councillor Singh's in the queue for questions, but we do have 3 delegations, so it's noted, Councillor. Yeah, very good. Okay, thank you. I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in immediate removal from the meeting. Interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, hate speech, or defamatory comments. Please do not take offense if there are no questions from council following your presentation. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. There are 3 delegations, and up first is Scott Albrecht. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Scott Albrecht. I'm a resident of Ward 10, and my opinions are my own, not connected to any other potential candidate or person. So with regard to the vacancy, my main concern that you take into account is the democratic process. I know that costs and timeliness were mentioned, and I think that the primary concern should be on the democratic process. Of course, a by-election is one obviously democratic way of filling this. However, I'd like to point out that a low voter turnout in by-elections could mean that a result may not give as strong as mandate as one might initially think. For example, the recent by-election in Cambridge's Ward 1 had about 60% of the number of votes cast as the previous general election. In fact, the winning candidate actually gained fewer total votes in that by-election as the winner than she did when placed second during the general election. Perhaps staff have a more wider variety of resources on by-election turnouts. So in this particular case, and in this case, in some ways only one valid democratic path that I see would be to appoint the runner-up from last election, and I'll say 3 reasons why this particular case is interesting in that way. First is that there was an open seat. The previous incumbent did not run again, and as almost all of you know, it is much easier more likely to have candidates when they don't have to face an incumbent. So that gave a wider variety of candidates who ran. Second, the candidate, the runner-up, did go through the process of the public scrutiny and then was able to garner a significant number of votes. In fact, as your staff report shows, within about 10% of the winner, or less than that, in fact. Close second and far ahead of the other candidates that were running. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, although most difficult to quantify specifically, is that the 2 candidates, the winner and the runner-up, actually presented similar visions in in their approach. I, for one, and people that I talked to, had difficulty choosing between the two. One local activist even wrote a blog post saying who he was voting for, mentioned that he'd waited so long, quote, I waited so long to write this because I couldn't make up my mind between the two frontrunners, and then listed 5 different points of difference, came three for one, 2 for the other. And then one sort of anecdotal piece of things is that both candidates actually ran for the nomination for the same provincial party that created the vacancy. In these particular circumstances, if there was a situation where 2 people had fairly divergent approaches and clearly one won, and other candidates that may have had a similar approach declined to run in order to rally around that one candidate, it could be a different situation. But in this particular cases, I feel that there was a similarity of vision. So in that case, it shouldn't be a precedent that this is always the case, but there could be considered a democratically appropriate situation. And as a slight aside, I know this is no longer allowed by provincial regulation, but if we had ranked ballots where people were allowed to choose their second choice, we would have had better data to know what that would be. So if there's any chance in the future to make that advocacy to the province to have improved democracy, that would be one option that I would encourage you to take separate from this current discussion. Finally, if you do decide to do a by-election, which I think would also be a valid democratic exercise, I would encourage you to perhaps even spend even more effort and time and money in the public outreach and advertising to counter the low voter turnout that usually happens in by-elections. So there will be less media attention. There's not other offices being contested at the same time. So I think democracy is worth it. It's worth the cost. It's worth the time. It's worth the money from the city. It's still a fairly small amount over the whole city budget, and I encourage you to find any ways possible to strengthen the democracy within the City of Kitchener. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Albrecht. There is a question from Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you very much for your delegation. I think you've laid out fairly clear facts of your opinion. And if I was forthcoming, I was coming into this meeting kind of a very similar basis of thought as well. And one thing that really resonated, perhaps something that I hadn't thought of, was the fact that in a by-election, the voter turnout tends to be lower. And that way, actually, it's a question of democracy. You're having less of representation of the electorate than perhaps the general election, where the runner-up in 2022 got a lot more voter turnout. So the other thing that came to my mind in looking at the results as you were going through your delegation is the fact that looking at the polling stations from Ward 10, there were 4 polls where the runner-up had the higher vote, okay, and the one who won had 5, I think. Looking at the polls that had much larger vote count, not looking at everything.
Sorry, Councillor Singh, correction. I believe it was 6 and 6, just because that was forwarded to us. But
I'm just calculating on my own basis. I'll explain it. I was looking at where voter turnout was much higher. There's some where it's like 5, 6 voter turnout. I'm trying to negate that and more looking at where there's like 100 plus vote count. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate more about the by-election and perhaps the potential of lesser voter turnout, and that's perhaps not necessarily supporting that whole democratic process as opposed to going by-election rather than the appointment route.
Not sure exactly your question. You're saying that there was different polls had different people winning, or what do you?
No, I was saying that they were very close on the polls that had higher vote count. Right. They're very close in the vote count in all of those polls. So and they were much higher vote count than perhaps what a by-election would allow. And so you made a point that a by-election tends to have a lower voter turnout. I was giving you an opportunity to elaborate more on that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if there's a lot more to say. Obviously, I think both candidates had, in the 22 general election, had support across the board. I don't think it was geographically, focused, for instance. It wasn't that one person had all her neighbors and the other person had all of her neighbors. So, yeah, I mean, there are ways to counter voter turnout, low voter turnout, that the city could imagine doing. But the trend has been, whether it was the recent provincial by-election, the Cambridge one, or if city staff want, I know the staff report surveyed other municipalities that have appointed or have replaced people in various ways. There wasn't a report indicating the relative voter turnout in those. So I know you've got till 3 o'clock to make this decision, so I don't know if city staff can find those numbers for any basis, but I mean, we all know that voter turnout tends to be, you know, half, 60, 70% of all the already kind of abysmal voter turnout that we get in general elections. That said, you know, to almost counter my own point, you know, a year and a half has passed. The provincial government has changed your roles. It would also be democratic to run a by-election, but the voter turnout piece is one thing that I want. That and the similarity between the candidates.
Okay, thank you. Up next for questions actually is Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. One of the things you mentioned was the similarity of the two candidates.
Right.
They both ran for the position of the certain political party.
Right.
So at City Council,
I know
it's political party politics shouldn't be part of it. So I don't feel. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I'm quite happy that City Council is a place where each person is independent. They make up their mind based on the evidence and the needs of their community. I said it almost reluctantly. It was just sort of a data point of saying, even though they're not, you know, you're not supposed to be aligned with a particular party, it does show a similarity of vision, and we know one of the reasons, and I'm not a political science expert, but just from general knowledge, one of the reasons pointed to that provincial and federal elections get higher turnout is because of the name recognition or the ease of identifying what general perspective you take. And so while two candidates, you know, while municipalities are not a party-based system, there is some indication of a general approach that I mean, it wasn't known during the election, so it's not like the voters in 2022 knew that those two candidates would also be for the same political party. And in fact, publicly available information shows that the candidate who's vacated the seat donated money to a different political party in 2022. So it's not a perfect representation, but it just shows that there is some general alignment. And along with the, you know, just the personal discussions, my own deliberations at the time, and the blog post by one activist are just, you know, as I said, harder to quantify about the similarity of vision because they are two different individuals, and voters choose between them. But I guess one slight data point, I was at an all candidates meeting. In fact, a third candidate, one of the other candidates who was there in response to one of the questions said, it was a question about the encampments, and, you know, a number of people said similar things, and the one candidate said, you know, nobody here is calling out the bulldozers, right? Like, there was a certain amount of alignment in the municipal issues that were presented at that all candidates meeting and in their public statements that in their campaigns.
Okay, thank you.
There are no further questions. Thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts, Mr. Albrecht. Next is Mr. Simon Guthrie. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, councillors, staff, and what I can only imagine is a vast online audience of concerned and interested fellow citizens. My name is Simon Guthrie, and I'm here to speak to the pressing matter of filling the Ward 10 vacancy, a task as crucial as finding the last puzzle piece in that 1,000-piece puzzle that you got of the Kitchener skyline for Christmas. Challenging, but essential in getting a complete picture. While I don't reside in Ward 10, my family church is here, and I hope that many who live in other wards recognize the downtown core as central to any picture of Kitchener. By my count, we're on day 26 of the vacancy, and we're faced with legislated guidance on how and when it can be filled. I have 5 minutes, so let's first look at our neighbors' approaches. All in 2023, Cambridge City Council and 2 local school boards faced vacancies created by resignation or the passing of the incumbent. The school boards both chose appointments over by-elections, weighing cost and democratic engagement. The public board invited applications, and trustees chose from amongst them in a process that was created transparently, but it included some very opaque aspects. The Catholic board considered only those that had been candidates in the last general election and chose a runner-up from a different constituency than the one that was vacant. Cambridge City Council faced a decision on how to fill the vacancy created by the passing of Ward 1 Councillor Donna Reid. They chose a by-election, and in the end, the voters chose the person who had been runner-up in the 2022 election. These cases highlight diverse approaches to a common challenge, underscoring that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Now let's pivot to the current predicament here at Kitchener City Council. A by-election, while democratic, comes with hefty costs and typically low turnout. A low turnout election could easily lead to questions about the winner's legitimacy. Conversely, council appointments could be perceived as biased, akin to choosing your favorite niece or nephew. It's tricky and might not sit well with everyone. Additionally, in a process that considers runner-up candidates, of which I note I am one, I'm concerned about a precedent. Should a bad actor realize that they can replace an undesirable, to them at least, incumbent with a runner-up that is more palatable, they might be emboldened to wage a campaign of harassment or bullying designed to lead to that incumbent's resignation. Directly appointing a runner-up might inadvertently promote a culture of hostility against elected officials, potentially encouraging resignations to pave the way for preferred candidates. While I haven't seen much indication of this at the City Council, I've certainly seen a lot of vitriol directed towards certain members of our local school boards, both online and in delegations. Our councillors, of course, will know what arrives in their inbox much better than I do. This brings me to a hybrid proposal that relies on robust civic engagement but fills the vacancy through appointment by creating a citizens advisory group, often called a citizens assembly. This group, comprising diverse, randomly selected Kitchener residents, would deliberate on a process and eventually on the candidates. Think of it as jury duty for civic engagement, a cross-section of our community coming together to make an informed decision. Kitchener City Council would commit to appointing the candidate recommended by this assembly. This approach balances cost-effectiveness, democratic integrity, and impartiality, ensuring that the new councillor is chosen and empowered by collective wisdom rather than fiscal constraints or political maneuvering. It would give us all, staff, elected officials, and citizens, a chance to see the instrument of citizens' assemblies in action in a new and innovative application. In closing, thank you for your time and attention to this matter of democratic importance. I'm aware that filling this vacancy is like threading a needle while riding the ion. It requires precision, balance, and a steady hand. I'm hopeful that my proposal offers a path forward that respects our democratic values and the diverse voices of Kitchener. I welcome any questions or thoughts you might have. Together, let's ensure that Ward 10's representation is not just filled, but fulfilled with the spirit of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. There's a question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I just want a clarification. This citizens' assembly that you're proposing, would it just be residents of Ward 10 or the citywide?
Residents of Ward 10.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and thank you so much for coming in. That is an interesting proposal. I'll have to ask staff, actually, if that is, something that would even be possible. But so you had mentioned that it would be residents of Ward 10. How would you go about choosing the people to be on that committee?
Well, thank you. And city staff, in part of their presentation, mentioned that there is no prescribed process that leads to the appointment, and so there is considerable latitude to design that process in a transparent and democratic way. Where you would draw from would could certainly be part of the discussion in setting up the process, but I would suggest you begin with the voters' roll. Drawing randomly from that group, maybe 20 to 50 individuals that are eligible voters within Ward 10, and then let them decide what the process is from there.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Guthrie. It is an interesting idea, but I kind of question the basis of that being a preference over potentially providing appointing someone that has ran an election, that has garnered support within the residents of Ward 10, as opposed to going through a citizens-appointed committee that chooses someone that may not have ran before, that no one has ticked off their name on a ballot. So how is that better?
There is no perfect solution, and there's probably no solution that is absolutely wrong either. There are a number of options in front of us that I would get behind, that I would cheer for, whether it's a by-election or certain flavors of appointment. This is not the only solution that I believe is healthy for our community and for our democracy. It's one that I wanted to put in front of you so that it gets some consideration, a little bit of deliberation, and perhaps introduces some new vocabulary to the political dialogue that's within Kitchener. How would it be better? I feel that it balances a number of the concerns that we've heard. It balances fiscal responsibility by not running a by-election. If this was a citizens' assembly that met perhaps for 2 afternoons, it could be facilitated perhaps by city staff or by a third party that's contracted to do it. I know there are organizations within Ontario even that have done this in the past. This isn't reinventing the wheel. It is a process that has been done elsewhere, though not here. It would balance off the concerns about an appointment and the lack of broad public engagement that might lead to that by engaging dozens of citizens.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Guthrie. There are no further questions.
Thank you.
Okay. The final delegation is Brooklyn Wallace. Afternoon, Brooklyn.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Brooklyn Wallace. I am a Ward 10 voter, and I'm here today to speak to your decision on how to fill our vacant council position. Just for transparency, I'd like to mention that I am the runner-up for Kitchener Ward 9. Had Councillor Chapman won the by-election, I would be in the position where appointing me as the runner-up might have been on the table. I'd also like to mention the fact that I have already stated that if there is a by-election in Ward 10, that I would be running in it. I've had many discussions about this over the last 6 months, just as everything has been up in the air, and I've been of 2 minds. For a long time, I was of the opinion that the voter turnout for a municipal by-election would be so low that I wasn't sure that a by-election would actually be the more democratic option. As shown in the recent Cambridge election, as mentioned earlier, it's very possible for the runner-up of the last election to win the by-election with fewer votes than they had during the general one themselves. I would not have been surprised if that were the case if there were a Ward 9 election, and I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case in a Ward 10 by-election. However, over the last 4 months or so, I have changed my opinion on that. I believe that having an appointment to avoid that circumstance is more treating the symptom instead of the actual problem itself. Obviously, having the winner of a by-election have so significantly fewer votes than the winner of the main election is not ideal. However, the way to avoid this happening is not by not having a by-election, it's by ensuring voter turnout in that by-election. There's been amazing work done on increasing voter turnout, and we need to apply that research and apply that work here in Kitchener. We absolutely need to put that work into place during our next general election, and I believe that this by-election, or possible by-election, would be an excellent place to start. Turnout is something that the city is responsible for, not just the voters. I would also support, although with less enthusiasm, an appointment by application process. I believe that the WRDSB process was fair and allowed for qualified candidates to bring their name forward. I'll also mention I was one of those candidates. Appointing the runner-up outright, in my opinion, awards a lot of circumstance. In 2022, I was actually only a few days away from announcing my own Ward 10 council run when I saw that another lovely trans woman was running already. I chose to run in Ward 9 because I felt that by running in the same ward as another trans person, I would be shooting both of us in the foot. I didn't think there would be enough people who would vote for a trans person for either of us to win if I split that vote by running. Appointing the runner-up with no other considerations means ignoring some amazing candidates who might have thought the same as me, or people who can't afford to take the time off work, or any other number of reasons that someone couldn't have or could have not to be able to run. I also support a lot of what Mr. Guthrie mentioned. A citizens' assembly is a great idea, and one I've heard him propose a number of times. That being said, running a proper campaign is how you earn a mandate, it's how you connect with your constituents, and how you prove to them that you can be trusted to do the work that you say that you want to do. I believe that since there are nearly 3 full years to have this replacement councillor, that the situation calls for a by-election just because of the mandate that brings. 3 full years with someone that people did not actually elect doesn't quite sit right with me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. There is a question from Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and thanks, Brooklyn, for coming in. So I had a question about your ideas around increasing voter turnout if we did do a by-election, because I just looked up the it says this, the unofficial results for the Kitchener Centre by-election, but it was 27.1% of people voted in that by-election, and that had media from across the province. It had, party leaders come in. It had lots of exposure. I think to help people get out and vote then. So with a ward by-election, what are your thoughts on, you're saying it's, it would be the city's responsibility? I'm wondering what you think could change there.
There is I forget the township, but there is a local township somewhere southern Ontario that did put a lot of work, and it took multiple years for this work to start increasing turnout. So I don't know if we'd be able to do it right away to really significantly impact. However, part of it is that the current way that we advertise elections, a lot of it being just through news, just through, there were not any really significant well-covered debates on during the by-election. I know that there was one that Acorn and a bunch of local organizations put together. But if you live nearby, or if you if you're a Kitchener Centre voter and you aren't on the right websites, in the right local spaces, it's very possible for you to only have known by your card coming in the mail, and that card doesn't tell you anything about the candidates themselves. That doesn't incentivize voting. During the municipal election, while canvassing, I had a lot of people complain just about how much information there was. There were 33 names on our ballot, I believe, Councillor Chapman, and I don't blame people on being overwhelmed by that. So what a lot of local places, or what this township was doing, was gather information from the candidates themselves, directly from the candidates, and send them all together to people and have it on a website all together. Even our current website only includes links to other people's sites, and a lot of the people in my ward did not have websites. A lot of people throughout the whole city did not have any websites or social media presence, and not being able to actually get any information about the people you might be voting for really disincentivizes even caring at all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There are no further questions. Brooklyn, thanks so much for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, that concludes all of the delegates, so we'd get back into questions of staff, and Councillor Singh, you're up first.
Yeah, I think the report itself, Mr. Chair, was fairly clear. So I will move for option 1A, which is for appointment of the runner-up from the most recent election in 2022.
Very good, thank you. So the motion that will be on the table, it's good in advance so people can make their comments too if they need, is option 1A, which would be the appointment of the runner-up, which would have been candidate Stephanie Stretch. There are 4 people in the queue. Up next is Councillor O'Dooney.
Thank you. May I still go ahead and ask my question?
Please, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to confirm from staff if we have any research has been done in terms of the average turnout for by-election in local municipal elections, possibly across Ontario, or whatever numbers that we do have, in comparison to the regular election.
Ms. Fusco.
So through the chair, so I did reach out to the municipalities that are referred to in the appendix. So there were 5 municipalities that held by-elections in 2023. I did hear back from 2 of those. Haldimand County, which was a ward by-election, did see a voter turnout reduction of approximately 14% between the general election and the by-election. And the second, the City of Toronto, did see an increase for the mayoral by-election. But I also looked into the City of Cambridge as our closest neighbour. So as noted previously, the 2023 by-election did also see a decrease in turnout from the general election to the by-election, and that is occurs same with their by-election held in 2020. The voter turnout decreased by approximately 9%.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have a breakdown on the cost of the different elections that are on Appendix E?
Ms. Fusco, go ahead.
So through the chair, I do not have a cost of the breakdown of the elections. That is something that I could obtain. However, I do note that each municipality's voting options are selected and are different. And so an example is the City of Cambridge held a multiple approach voting method in 2022 consisting of internet voting and paper ballot tabulator. So they were afforded the opportunity to consider those multiple voting methods with respect to the by-election. So the point being that each municipality determines its own method, and the size and the geography ultimately impact the number of equipment and therefore the cost that is obtained.
Okay, and for those that were done by appointment, can you give us some information on how those appointments were made? Like, was it based on the runner-up? Was it based on, applications, or How are they made?
So through the chair, so it was a mix between, there's approximately, I think, 3 or 4 that were appointed. Those that I do recall were done via application. So a public notice was issued, and they did hold a public meeting where those applications were considered. I'm looking at the one that jumps to mind is West Elgin, and I believe they had between 10 and 15 interested applicants submit an application form with a personal statement, and then those members did attend council and speak to their personal statement and application, and the method, the individual was selected through that process. So generally speaking, the appointment has been a mix between direct appointment of the 2022 and the public process.
Okay, another question I have is, all of these seats were in, since the election in 2022, right? So all of them, it appears, I believe, were vacated before the end of the first year of these, the original candidates being elected, correct? Historically, do you have any data that goes beyond the 22 election, or is there a change in the Municipal Act, or the, you know, is this new, all these options that we can choose, or have they always been there, or was it automatically a by-election, or has anything changed since the last election in 2022?
So through the chair, our focus was on 2023 by-elections, given that the society, climate, political realm has changed so much. So we did focus on those that, as you pointed out, had either a resignation or a passing of a member from the 2022 term. To my knowledge, the Municipal Act has always afforded an appointment process and or by-election process. With respect to, there have been changes, but as it relates to strong mayors, and so that is relatively new, but only affects where the vacancy occurs in the office of the mayor. But the 2 options have been long-standing within the Municipal Act.
And you don't have any idea of, you know, in pre-2022, you know, how often by-elections were held versus appointments?
Through the chair, that was not part of our survey, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Schneider's up next.
Thank you, Chair Davey. No questions of staff. Excellent report. I just wanted to say that if Councillor Singh's motion does not pass, I would like to move option 2 for the by-election.
Very good, thank you. Next is Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And yeah, I did have a couple of questions of staff. The first one being, and I'm sorry, Simon, I can't remember your last name, or I would call you Mr.
Guthrie.
Simon. Thank you. Okay. He had an idea around a citizens advisory group. I'm wondering if staff can comment on that, if that's something that's ever been done before, or if it's something that could be done and how that would be done.
So through the chair, it's not something that I've come across in my research in terms of having a citizen assembly or a body that considers this information. With respect to the options, council must determine the method within 60 days. So certainly I would envision that it could be a hybrid as noted with option 1B. So instead of having council consider the applicants, you could have a citizens assembly convene to consider those applicants. Those members would need to be determined or appointed by council, and a terms of reference would need to be built to determine how that process will work. Due to timing, just looking at the dates, if that citizens assembly met late January to consider all of the applicants, it would mean that council would be required to accept their recommendation and swear the candidate in at the same evening. So again, simply due to timing, it certainly would lend to combining it with the public appointment process, but it would require council to determine the approximately 20 to 50 voters that were mentioned, have them appointed, have a terms of reference developed, convene the citizens assembly, and ultimately have a recommendation that council would be required to accept the same evening.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is, I'm wondering if you can maybe expand on what the clerk's office or what the city does when there is an election to help advertise that, in terms of what Ms. Wallace was bringing up around the duties of the city and what we can do and what we do around an election to help promote.
So through the chair, so with respect to the concept of voter turnout, it is quite challenging. It is a complex process that involves things like voter fatigue, general communication and election awareness, voters list accuracy, but also trends that have been spoken about in terms of the low turnout for other elections. So the role of the returning officer is to administer the election so that it is an uncontroverted, successful election. With respect to the 2022 election, we do partner with our partners in corporate communications. We developed a robust communications plan that involved posting notices in the Waterloo Region Record, but also a social media campaign. We had an elections microsite that featured all of the information. We also met individually with candidates to ensure that they were aware of all of the forms and documentation, and we produced get out and vote materials as it came closer to voting day with respect to the voting locations, the voting times. We also built a short 30-second video around the municipal election, voting locations, voting dates. There was some information in that slide as well with respect to regional services versus city services. So all in, we do a multi-pronged communication platform. I also did interview several times with the local media news outlets to try to increase the awareness around the voting dates, times, and locations. And then lastly, we do issue the voter cards. And so again, referring back to the voters list accuracy, if you received a card, there was information on that card with respect to key materials. So all in, those were the tactics that we undertake to ensure that the election is well understood.
Yeah, thanks. And then in terms of the actual voting, we have a variety of things, though I know internet voting is not an option, but can perhaps talk about that later. But there's a variety of ways that people, that the clerk's office does help people vote as well. Maybe you can just mention that as well.
Sure, through the chair. So we were implementing a paper ballot tabulator election. So we did offer curbside voting. So again, this was during COVID, and so for any members of the public that did not want to physically enter a voting location, there was a process that they could contact City Hall, and we would have a managing deputy returning officer or a deputy returning officer meet them at the location. Proximity to the parking lot, they would be their identification would be confirmed, they'd be issued a ballot, and that ballot would be put through the tabulator. We also offered a proxy voting process, and so if members, electors knew that they were not going to be available, they could appoint a proxy to vote on their behalf, and we did have a number of those that were issued. So we, as you mentioned, internet voting was not an option, vote at home was not an option, but we did endeavor to make paper ballot tabulator voting as accessible as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have Mayor Rabinovich. Comment? Okay. So that concludes all the questions. They don't have any. So if you want to queue in for a quick question, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just a quick question. Compared to a by-election and the dates outlined in the report and a normal election cycle from the day that you can nominate your name and start running a campaign and the election date, are they both the same? Or my assumption was the general election cycle, there's a longer period.
So through the chair, that would be correct. And so a general election, nominations opened on May the 1st and nominations closed August the 19th. So a much longer period of time than the 45 days. And 45 days is the middle. We could have went with a 30-day nomination process, but we're concerned about the ability for individuals to file. And then similarly, election day being 45 days prior, you had until October the 22nd to hold the general election. So it is a much condensed timeline.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. If you'd like to comment, I would ask you to queue in now. At the moment, we have two. Mayor Rabinovich.
Well, thanks very much, Chair Davey, and thank you to the delegations that came today to present, as well as those who have reached out. And I know, even yesterday during the levy, there were folks coming up to me, and some who strongly had a view that we should appoint the next person in line, others who felt that we should have a by-election, and even as late as today we heard from some who felt that we shouldn't appoint at all and that we should just split it up amongst the 9 of us. But as we know, that's not an option that's available according to the Municipal Act. And just going back to Councillor Chapman's questions, just sort of around the past, I'm going to touch on it only because this is one of the things that I've reflected on as I was considering the options that Council would be grappling with today. And Ms. Fusco is absolutely right. Both options have always been on the table. I seem to recall many years ago there was an option that in the final 6 months, I don't even know if that's still there, but I don't think it's still there, that we don't need to do anything anymore in a term. But I can reflect back on sort of some of the history locally that we know of. And so in 1997, when then actually Ward 10 Councillor Karen Redmond went to Ottawa, the council of the day filled that role for the balance of the term. Actually, I think back then we had to fill it. That's the change that happened, because it was in June of 2017, and so we actually filled it by going to the number 2 candidate at the time, who was Karen Taylor Harrison. It was a close election, if I remember correctly, and Karen Taylor Harrison then continued on serving in that capacity for some time. In 2002 is the other one that I can remember, and in that time we were about a year into the term when then Ward 3 Councillor Jim Ziegler became appointed a Justice of the Peace, and we had to either appoint or go to an election because Councillor Ziegler was acclaimed in that election, and so appointing the next person in the list wasn't an option. I will note that in 2014 at the region, we had to deal with this issue, and it was when Wayne Wetlaufer passed away about 7 months into the term, and the option that Regional Council went with was to appoint the next person on the regional list, and that was Elizabeth Clark, who, as you know, went on to serve for a couple of terms in that capacity, including chairing the Community Services Committee. And then, of course, we've had in the report the recent Cambridge example, where the by-election simply resulted in the second person becoming the person who was who ultimately was appointed. In my mind, you know, when I look at sort of some of that history, and when I look at the actual facts around this particular election and the results, I can support the motion that Councillor Singh is bringing forward. Looking at some of that history, but more importantly, looking at the closeness of the election and the fact that we are only 115 votes apart between the first and the second candidate. The fact that that second candidate is actually got more votes than all of the remaining candidates in that race combined. And so when I look at all of those things, when I look at the costs associated, and you can't argue, you know, I mean, I think one could argue that there's, you know, democracy has a cost, and we have to be prepared to pay for that cost, and I certainly am prepared to do that. But I think there's clearly a strong second candidate in this instance that, you know, wasn't the case everywhere. And I think when we compile all those things, it, in my mind, is a reasonable, logical conclusion. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer here. There's different viewpoints, and that's good and that's healthy. That's part of democracy. And at the end of the day, Council will make its decision, and will proceed in whatever manner unfolds as a result of that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. There are 6 people with comments, including my own in the queue. Up next is Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Well, I cannot go back as far as the mayor did, not even close, so I'm going to let that one pass. But I've looked at this from a lens of, as a relatively new councillor. It's only my second term. But when people go to the polls to vote, they vote for the one that they think is the most qualified. And I think the fact that the second runner-up, it was, to the mayor's point, 115 votes away from a tie even. I think the most prudent thing and the right thing to do is to listen to the constituents of that ward. And of the day, the constituents of that ward actually chose that runner-up to be their counselor. So since this is, we are now looking at this person, I would support Councillor Singh's motion for this. I think it's the fair and the just way, but I also appreciate and understand where the other delegates are coming from, and where you feel that, you know, it should be a democratic process. But I do think that this is a somewhat democratic process as well, because we are listening to the constituents of Ward 9, and they did choose Stephanie as the second person. So I will support Councillor Singh. 10.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I see this, I think, you know, the options before us, it's fairly clear, in my mind anyways. The way I come to this, there are three tenets that are sacrosanct to me, and that's responsive representation, of course, democracy, and our responsibility for fiscal responsibility towards our Kitchener citizens as a whole. And the decisions before us, I think, ensuring that we do right by the Ward 10 residents. We have an opportunity to perhaps appoint a person who has ran a campaign in the ward. They have put forward their platform. They have communicated with the residents through a prolonged election process rather than something that may be far condensed. This may seem superficial, but running a campaign in the winter months where there's limitations and reluctance of people wanting to even open the door. Is that effective democracy? Perhaps that could play a part in negating as a negative effect. So taking all those things into account, I think appointing the runner-up is the right course to do. And looking at the total tally of the votes cast, above 4,500 plus, and the runner-up was only 116 votes away from winning. I think it's clear that there was an effective amount of people that chose that this person could provide good representation on their behalf for Ward 10 and representing the interests of the city. And then on top of it, for fiscal responsibility, you know, a matter of $100,000 cost to get to a result where, you know, you're running a campaign where there may be a lower voter turnout, and we are not getting necessarily the effective result for democracy that we would want, right? That's not necessarily a positive for anyone. I think so in my mind, the option is fairly clear amongst all. The worst of it all is, of course, direct appointment by council. I don't think, I'm full confidence, no one around this horseshoe would support us just choosing to decide someone without a public process. I think it's very clear between option one, which is appointment, or by-election, and I think option one is the better, that more importantly, we provide the representation to this ward that's been lacking for a number of months. I'm not faulting Councillor Clancy. I'm sure she did her best to balance the priorities of her ward and running a provincial election, but again, perhaps it wasn't 100%, and Ward 10 residents deserve 100%, and I think very soon, rather than delaying it further on into the spring. So the option is very clear before me.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Up next is Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and thank you for our delegates, and thank you for staff for putting, you know, a very informative package together for us councillors to decide how we want to move forward. You know, $97,000 is a lot of money for a by-election, but at the end of the day, I don't think you can put a price tag, and shouldn't put a price tag, on democracy and the right to vote. My opinion, a by-election is the best and most democratic way to fill any vacant seat. If there were 1 year left on this current term, then I would be in full support of an appointment of the person and or the runner-up into that seat. But we still have a little less than 3 years, and I believe it's important to hear the constituents' voice again. We've heard that by-elections tend to have a lower voter turnout, but we've also seen that voter turnout at all levels of government elections in the last number of years have become even lower, in particular municipal elections. But we still continue to hold elections no matter how many voters turn out. If one person turns out, then that's democracy. democracy is having the ability to vote or not to vote. It's not based on how many people do vote. Based on this, I would argue that due to the potential of a low interest is not a reason not to continue advocating for democracy and the ability to vote. Can we imagine if the provincial government, as a result of MPP Lindo's resignation last year, had the power to appoint the runner-up and did so? I'd like to think that we'd be very, very angry, and we would call it unfair, and we would say it's undemocratic. And luckily, they don't have that option to do so. But if we appoint, we could be missing out on a voice that maybe hadn't run before. Maybe it wasn't the right time for that person. Maybe their situation professionally, financially, or their family situation has changed. Not holding a by-election prohibits the constituents from choosing their best candidate. And I understand what everybody's saying, that the runner-up was only a few votes behind the Ashland, and she had more votes than all the other candidates put together. I understand that. But opinions change. Perhaps the runner-up in their last, isn't the best person for the role anymore. Maybe they've changed their position on city issues, societal issues, environmental issues. So the platform that they ran on 16 months ago may have changed, and those who voted for them may decide to change their vote based on that fact. So in the end, I can't support Councillor Singh's motion of appointing the runner-up, as I believe the by-election is the most democratic and fair way to fill that vacant seat. But lastly, I will absolutely support whatever this council votes for, and if that support is for an appointment of the runner-up, I will welcome Ms. Stretch, and I will continue to work together like we have for the last 16 months for the betterment of the city. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deneau. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And thank you to the delegates for coming in today. And thank you for the people that have shared their thoughts with us, including a number of people from Ward 10 that we've heard from over the last little while. I must say, this has actually been a very difficult decision for me. It really, really has. You know, my first thought actually does go to doing a by-election, but honestly, I struggle with spending $100,000 on this when with a recent by-election in Cambridge. Not that the same thing would happen, but to have a by-election there, and that the person who did finish second won it. And with fewer votes than they got last time. That's not presupposing what a result would be here. But I've had a lot of time to reflect on this, and time actually means a lot here. The residents of Ward 10 have been without a representative for quite some time now. I know that the two councillors who are running both took a leave of absence as of October to run in this, but you know, even before that, perhaps they were working hard on getting elected in the by-election as well. And our staff in the Mayor and Council's office, we have 2 constituency assistants for 10 councillors, and they have worked hard to basically replace a councillor over that period of time. And I'm really interested in Ward 10 getting a representative in place. They're going to have some time that they're going to need to ramp up into the position as well. But I feel that the sooner that we're able to get a representative in place for them, the better for those constituents who really haven't had that same voice around the table for quite some time. And frankly, I would like to say a thank you to our staff who have been fulfilling in many ways, answering questions from residents for that period of time. So a big thank you to Elizabeth, Anita, and Sarah over the last while as well. I also want to say that this is not precedent setting. That if ever there's another vacancy to fill, we will take a look at it individually at that time as well. So to say that this is precedent setting, I think is a mistake. we're looking at a different period of time here. We're looking at someone who was elected, that finished in the election very closely behind the winner, and that won 6 of the 12 polling stations, with the other person winning the other 6. So to me, as I said, it was a difficult decision, but I've landed in that we should appoint the runner-up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davey. Thank you to the delegates and to all the comments that we received regarding this issue. I think it's pretty difficult for ourselves to not go with the option that's being put forward by Councillor Singh, and I don't want to go over the same points made over and over again. I think the one issue that we should be concerned about is the lack of representation in the downtown for some time, and the longer we delay this for an outcome that I feel will be exactly the same outcome as what was about a year and a half, just a year and a couple months. I think we're just, I think whatever situation we do, I think in any situation of all the options, that is the process, and it's all democratic. And to say otherwise, I think is somewhat of a misleading. And so with that, I do support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Councillor No covered off a lot of the points I was going to make, so I won't repeat them. I do want to thank the delegations for coming in and speaking and sharing your thoughts for that. For me, I really believe that it's the electorate that should decide who sits here. I just feel strongly about that. I know there's been a period of time where the residents of Ward 10 have not been represented, but I feel it's up to the electorate to get this right, to choose their person. Things have changed since Election Day. If there is a by-election, we don't know who might run. I just feel it's best if the electorate makes that decision. I did want to comment on the low voter turnout comments. I'm not so sure that even if there was 100% voter turnout, that the results of these elections would have changed. I look back to the recent by-election in Kitchener Centre, and Councillor Chapman, Councillor Clancy, I commend you so much on the hard work you did campaigning. Twice, both candidates' teams were at my door. Both left information twice. Things in the mail, lawn signs. It's abundantly clear during an election that there is an election. It's up to the individual whether they decide to vote or not. I just wanted to comment on that. So I, with all respect, won't be voting for the motion, but as Councillor Deneau said, if this is the direction that Council wants to go in, I can see that, there's a 2.3% difference in the voting percentage, 115 vote difference. I will welcome Ms. Stretch with open arms to join this Council and continue the good work that's being done together with our staff.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I too found it difficult to decide which way I'm going to vote on this. I recall in my 2010 election when I lost by 1 vote, a tie would have resulted in the flipping of a coin. So, I mean, that's how the elections work, right? Or can work. So I appreciate the position that the results of the 22 election in Ward 10 were very close, but if they weren't close, what would we be saying? right? So is it strictly because of how close they were, or is it because we believe in the democratic electoral process, which, as a political scientist, I feel that I have to support Councillor Deneau's and Councillor Schneider's position on this. It's unfortunate that we're given so many options here that we could choose. And yes, it prolongs the process, and that's not ideal as either. But I think we need to go back to the electorate and let them make the decision. And I too would welcome, you know, if council so chose to go with the runner-up, I would fully support the arrival of our new councillor. So, thank you.
Thank you. That concludes everyone's comments. I'll make a few of my own. Yeah, this was an interesting process when I was trying to deliberate how to go forward. The first thing I did, which those of you that know me was very difficult, was to put the cost of it aside, because as much as I, you know, hate spending money, frankly, you can't consider that really when you're talking about democracy. What's interesting, though, and a lot of the data was Mr. Albrecht brought forward, I discovered when I was doing my research on this as well, and that is, it really comes down to a question of democracy and what is the most democratic thing that we can do. And I first looked at this, and all historical situations like this was in favor of by-elections. Then I looked at the data a little more closely in this situation. The reason I've been that way is because typically how it works is you have a person of one political mindset or party that wins, and then the counter person comes in second. But as Mr. Albrecht pointed out, and those of us that are aware, the two candidates that placed 1-2 in this election had very, very similar platforms. They're both concerned about affordability and the environment, etc. So that's the first thing that sort of wiped it off the list in terms of democracy. The second thing was how really, really close this vote was. Little over 2% separated the first and second candidate. The winning candidate had 36% of the vote. The second candidate, Stephanie Stretch, had 34% of the vote. And what I also found interesting when I was reading staff's report is, I didn't consider this earlier on, but with all due respect to Councillor Clancy, there's a very well-known ranking order where you are on the ballot. If your name is first, you get 3 to 5%, typically on average. This has been studies from Laval and McGill and several universities in the States. You get a 3 to 5% bump just by having your name first on the ballot. And Councillor Clancy was first on the ballot, and Stephanie Stretch was 4th of 5, which makes that 2% really, like, we're talking a dead heat in terms of the democratic process there. So when I look at all of those things put together, really the fact that we're, you know, if this goes forward, I'm going to support Councillor Singh's motion that we're not putting forward, we're not spending that extra, you know, $90,000, $100,000. I think that's just a bonus. And the other thing I would add, and I was speaking with Councillor O'Dooney on this actually as well, is the need for someone to represent. That's been said. The spot's been vacant. It is a downtown ward. It's very busy. They are up there with development and homeless situations. They need someone. We can't wait until the end of April in this situation, in my mind, especially with all of the other information in front of us. So I will certainly support option 1A as put forward by Councillor Singh, and I would also suggest that in this situation a recorded vote is appropriate.
So through the chair, thank you. So through the chair, so Clerks is presenting the motion on the screen here. So as I mentioned in my summary slide, we would recommend that a second clause be added, that the clerk be directed to confirm qualifications and consent of the candidate and bring forward the appointment bylaw for adoption to the next council meeting.
I believe that is the motion that Councillor Singh wanted to bring forward, correct? Word by word. Thank you. Yeah, recorded vote's been called, sorry. Okay, voting's open. And the motion to appoint the runner-up in Ward 10 carries. Very good. We have one last item, the administrative penalty system. I don't believe there's a presentation on this. There is a presentation? Okay, apologies. Ms. McNeil, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Davey and members of Council. Happy New Year. Just wait for my presentation to come up. Thank you. So staff are before you today with a recommendation to expand our current administrative monetary penalty system program, which is also referred to as AMPS, to include the non-parking related matters, and more specifically adding the 25 bylaws that are found on the front page of your report into the AMPS program. This project was completed in collaboration with both the cities of Waterloo as well as the City of Cambridge. The current process, switch my slide. The current process, which is the court process, is guided by legislation with little room for dispute resolution methods. When someone receives a charge, they have two options available to them. They can make a payment directly to the court, or they can request a trial. If they choose to dispute a ticket, they will attend court to meet with our legal staff, with the prosecutor, to have what is known as an early resolution meeting. If the prosecutor is able to negotiate an agreed upon settlement, they still have to go before a justice of the peace, as they are the only ones that have the final decision. This often requires people to take time off work and potentially sit in court all day. The Municipal Act allows for the implementation of an AMPS program by municipalities, and AMPS moves the adjudication of provincial offences tickets from the Provincial Offences Court to an internal dispute process. This allows the city to resolve tickets with more flexibility and ease of process while providing an open, transparent, and objective appeal process. So upon receiving a penalty notice, the individual will have 30 days to pay the penalty or to request a screening. The current court process allows people 15 days. Therefore, we've doubled the amount of time that we're giving people to decide which way they want to go. If they request a screening will be held by appointment with legal staff. And this, with legal staff meeting, this is a meeting they currently participate in anyway. So the meeting with legal staff as a screening really just replaces the early resolution process. The benefit of this is that it provides our legal staff with several options that only a justice of the peace has now. So they will be able to confirm the fine amount, reduce the fine amount, provide people an additional amount of time to pay, or set up a payment plan with people. If the person is not satisfied with the screening process, they still have the ability to request a hearing. So hearings will be scheduled virtually or in person at City Hall. They're presided over by a hearing officer, which is an independent party appointed by council, which is the report that just came before you under consent. The hearing is considered quasi-judicial, but it's significantly less formal than a POA trial, and the decision of the hearing officer is final. The proposed fees that are listed here are in line with other municipalities as well as our partners in Waterloo and Cambridge. Penalty fees are imposed as an incentive to resolve the penalty notice as early as possible. Staff are recommending a screening/hearing penalty fee of $100. This would be applied when an individual has booked a meeting and failed to show without any advance notice or rescheduling. Staff are also recommending a late payment fee of 25%, which would be added if someone completely ignored their fine. The 30 days has passed and they've neither paid or requested a screening. An example of the fine would be, I think the average fine amount that we have is $300, so 25% of that would be $75, so their total payable would then be $375. And lastly, staff are recommending a collection fee of 15% of the total payable, which would be cost recovery. And we know that collection companies will charge us a fee for collection, therefore we will put that back on the person who's failed to comply. Penalty fees are designed to only penalize those that are delinquent in dealing with their fines. So if people follow through and follow the process, there will be no subsequent penalty fees for them. So what are the benefits of AMPS? AMPS provides enhanced customer service. It's less formal and intimidating than the court process. There's increased flexibility and discretion to resolve disputes in the early stages of the process. And the city controls the schedules for screenings and hearings, which will significantly reduce wait times. Our wait times currently in the court system is 6 to 8 months to even get a trial to court. That's not even setting a trial. So it's quite substantial. Council approves the set fine amounts and penalties, which are also included in your package, and this is a change. Normally the province is the one that would set the penalty amounts. And it reduces the amount of time legal staff and bylaw officers will need to spend in court. So it is not unheard of to have legal staff and officers sitting in court for an entire day waiting for their case to be called. The outcomes are more timely, it's greater accessibility for ticket holders, and it relieves pressure on the current court system. So prior to 2019, we were in the court system for parking offenses. In 2019 is when we developed our AMPS program for parking, which we currently use. Our trial requests for court prior to the AMPS program was we would receive just over 1,000 trial requests a year. Since implementing AMPS, our average hearing requests are approximately 80 a year. So you can see that's less than 1% of people are requesting a hearing. So people are satisfied at the screening stage and are getting out of it what they want. So next steps for the AMPS program is there are 3 bylaws and 6 council policies that form part of council's package. The first bylaw is the approval of the administrative penalty system bylaw, which really is just the administration of the program and how it works. The second is the approval of the screening and hearing officer bylaw. The third is the approval of the bylaw to amend the 25 chapters that are on the front page of your report to incorporate them into the AMPS system. And then lastly, there's the 6 council policies which guide the program and are a requirement under the Municipal Act. So next steps for staff is if council supports this, we're looking at a go-live date of Q2, likely May or June of this year. That will give us time to go through. We've got several software upgrades that we need to do. We're looking to have staff write electronic tickets. We need to create our own penalty notice that looks different than the court system penalty notice, as well as the related forms. And we have to develop a communications plan to educate the public on the changes to the system. And then lastly, just having some time to train staff and have them understand the program as well. So that is it.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This appears dramatically more efficient. There are a few questions. I'll give you a second to get to your seat. First up is Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think a thank you is necessary towards you, Gloria. I know you've spearheaded this process change from to the AMPS program for parking tickets, and now, of course, broadening that program amongst juggling many other bylaw-related issues, which we're all very aware of. And so thank you for that hard work and the hardships that you had to entail to get to this point. So I think this is the right course. Now, with the experience that we've had with the parking tickets, I think it's been a positive change where we have less people requesting for a hearing. What kind of saving has there been towards staff time where a hearing was requested and no longer staff are required to be in attendance in that hearing in the current AMPS program? And as you enter that, basing on that data, with broadening the additional offenses, the bylaw offenses as well, which does require some more in-depth involvement of our staff from our legal team, as well as in attendance from be it bystander staff or apart from the parking. What kind of savings would we anticipate?
Thank you. Through the chair, so we have seen a significant savings in staff time. Again, just not having officers sitting in court all day with parking trials. We would often have 7, 8 officers sitting in court, a lot of times on overtime. as it was their day off. So we are not seeing that at all anymore. There's no requirement for the officer to attend a hearing. So it's just the information is factual. It's based off of the ticket. So we have removed that requirement, which has allowed us to redirect those staff to doing other tasks instead of sitting in court. Legal staff are the same thing. We no longer utilize our legal staff to do trials for parking offenses. We have one of our managers who acts as a prosecutor in that sense. So that's been a huge savings. We anticipate the same savings with staff time moving to AMPS for non-parking. We will still be utilizing legal staff, a little bit different, but not, I don't believe they'll be spending the same amount of time because, again, they now have the ability to do that screening and find a resolution with people and resolve it that same day without having to go through and see a justice of the peace.
Yeah, so I'm not going to put you on the spot to give me that exact number, but I think outlining that efficiency, that overall through the process and savings, as well as, of course, a better experience of having people negotiate or challenge whatever offense that they may have been indicted. I think it would be a positive thing to be in the public ether, right? So if that information can be provided at a later time, that would be beneficial in more concrete numbers. One last question, more so towards the fine. If someone, of course, has not met that timeline of paying the fine, 15% is quite a bit on top of the 25% initial late fee. If someone identifies a hardship, financial hardship, would they be exempt?
Through the chair, yes. So what will happen is, I didn't want to get into the details of the program just because it's hard to follow, but if somebody does not respond within 30 days, we will send them a letter saying you have failed to respond, there's 25% added now, and give them a new timeline. If somebody were to come forward and they had an extenuating circumstance, such as they were in hospital, they were out of country, they were unable to respond, there is allowance for that in the program. There is also a financial hardship allowance. So if somebody comes to us and says, they're on assisted living and they can't afford the fine, that's something that we have to take into consideration as part of the dispute resolution process.
Okay, I'm glad that's in the process. I'm not going to keep back for a comment. I just want to say I hope the communication is very clear as to defining what those fines are for non-attendance, and then, of course, the late fees as well.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this. I'm happy to move it when the time comes. But I did have a couple questions. When you talk about the new bylaws that are going to be added to AMPS, are there any that are not being added, and why? If not, why?
Through the chair, so what we did was we went through all of the bylaws in the Municipal Act and pulled out the ones that are the most commonly used. So the advantage of the AMPS program for non-parking is that we can run both programs concurrently with the courts. So we don't have to be completely out of the courts like we did for parking, so we can do both. So if we have a bylaw that we didn't move to AMPS and we wanted to lay charges, we can still go through the courts for that. Or if we have a fine amount where we don't think it's substantial enough for the violation that's occurred, we can go through the courts to ask for that higher fine amount. So there's still that flexibility to run both programs.
Okay. But are there any bylaws that you could highlight that aren't being included? Just to give us an idea, maybe not.
So zoning is one that is not, and it's just because the Planning Act doesn't have a provision in it that allows us to move it to an AMPS program. There are others. I could send it to council, a list of them if you'd like. I don't know off the top of my head how many there were, but we just picked out the ones that we are most commonly using and would benefit from having the internal process for.
Okay, no need to follow up. I was just curious. My other question had to do with in Schedule A, page 32, Chapter 687, which has to do with the snow removal from roofs and sidewalks. I didn't see any in column 4, the penalty amount. Is that because it depends on the amount of time to remove the snow, or like all the other chapters give a fine, right? They set the penalty amount. Yet in that section, there's no dollar amount.
Through the chair, that's a really great catch. That was obviously an error on our part, and we will get that fixed before it moves forward to council. So I would anticipate we will assign it the same penalty amount, the $300, and then the subsequent $450 for that as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and thank you for this. I'm just wondering, I mean, there's so many good things about this, the efficiency for staff and just the efficiency in time. I have had several of my residents, constituents, move forward with AMPS, and I was very happy to receive contact from them afterwards, seeing how happy they were with the process. Do we have any customer satisfaction on this? Because I would imagine it would be fairly high.
Through the chair, there's nothing that we would record in terms of customer satisfaction. I think probably the best number that we can show is that substantial reduction in the number of hearings that we are getting now, the 80 a year versus over 1,000 trial requests. So I think that speaks to the satisfaction of customers going through the program.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to get that out there, that I was so happy to hear back from residents. They were very pleased with the process, with the way they were treated, respected, and they felt they were heard, and they came away with more understanding of our bylaws. So I think it's a really great move forward to include more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just one question. I want clarification on the authority of council now to set the fines. Is that like absolute? Is that, I guess, and the other question I would ask, is that something that you anticipate we'll revisit with any frequency, like we do with your user fees for other programs, for example?
Through the chair, so yes, council has that ability through an AMPS program to set those fines, whereas now we have to make application to the province if it's under the POA system. So that it is up to council. We anticipate probably not as often as the user fees, but maybe anytime we bring forward a bylaw for, updating, or if it's being repealed and replaced, during that review process, I think would be appropriate. And again, if there was something that became an issue in the moment that we needed to increase the fine amounts for, that could be something we could look at that point as well.
So I can finally bring forward my dream of implementing $1 million fine for littering? That's fine. There are no other questions. It's been moved by Councillor Chapman. Any other comments? I'm not seeing any. This is great work. I'm very happy to see this efficiency. Way to go. Those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Good work. That concludes Finance and Corporate Services Committee. Mr. Mayor.
I think we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll start. My thinking, and we'll discuss it when we get to council. As you know, we've got a couple items that we need to ratify on the agenda. This AMPS decision. And then the decision that we had made earlier with respect to filling the vacancy for Ward 10. And then we have council member appointments. I would actually suggest that we move forward, if council would like, with respect to the appointments. I know there are 3 that related to former councillor Clancy on here. One of them will, assuming that Ms. Stretch informs the clerk that she's eligible and interested in taking on the role, will automatically go to Ms. Stretch because the downtown BIA is specific to the Ward 9 and 10 councillors. The other 2, which is the Active Transportation and Trails Advisory Committee and the Climate Change Environmental Committee, I would actually suggest that we proceed with those. If there's a member of council who's interested, we can consider that today. If there isn't, then we can obviously pass that on at that point in time. Because the reality is that the Ms. Stretch is going to have a whole lot of learning really in a short period of time, and we're going to come back to this in 8 months anyway. Because remember, these are committee appointments that are on a 2-year cycle, and so this is really just filling out the remainder of the 2-year cycle. So that would be my suggestion, but I'll obviously be at the will of council. So reflect on that for the next 10 minutes while we have a break, and we'll come back at 3:20.